This is the beginning of the end for the Netanyahu government, as a second Israeli ultra-Orthodox party, the Shas party, has decided to resign from Netanyahu's government. This is because the Shas party is mad at Netanyahu for drafting the ultra-Orthodox to the IDF. The Shas party went on to say that although they resigned from Netanyahu's government, they are not leaving his coalition because doing so would collapse his government immediately. However, with this latest development, Israeli political analysts have said that it is the beginning of the end for the Netanyahu government, as elections are expected in Israel in 2026. With opposition parties in Israel already calling for elections and calling this Netanyahu government as illegitimate. And the issue of the ultra-Orthodox is already tearing Israel apart, so much so that Israel could completely descend into total civil war over this issue, as Israeli society feels that it is deeply unfair that they have to enlist and go to war and fight, while the ultra-Orthodox get to stay at home and study the religious texts. A recent poll has also shown that 85% of all Israelis support the IDF enlisting the ultra-Orthodox, and the IDF are also desperate for more men, as their death toll in recent weeks has risen to almost 900.
There's a press conference underway in the building where I am, and it's quite an extraordinary one. These are Israeli reservists who've been called up for duty.
We're over 365 and counting soldiers who served during the war and have declared that we will not report for duty.
And who are saying they don't want to take part in a pending military offensive against Gaza City.
We refuse to take part in Netanyahu's illegal war, and we see it as a patriotic duty to refuse and to demand accountability from our leaders.
And they're saying that the reason they don't want to take part in this Gaza offensive is because they don't trust the government, they don't trust Prime Minister Netanyahu, they don't trust other members of his governing coalition, which includes some far right-wing extremists, and they don't believe that it will succeed in bringing the hostages back. It's a patriotic duty, they say, not to serve.
למה חרדים לא מתגייסים לצבא?
אנחנו לא מוכנים ללכת לצבא שכל מטרתו וכל ייעודו הוא לשנות את הציבור החרדי ולהרבב אותם עם ציבור שפורק עול וכופר בתורה ובמצוות.
אתה באמת מוכן למות ולא להתגייס?
ודאי וודאי. אני וכל הציבור החרדי מוכנים לזה, והחילונים יכולים לשכוח מהרעיון הזה שיהיה כזה מושג צבא חרדי. לא היה ולא יהיה כזה דבר. מוכן עכשיו, גם עכשיו, לקחת את הידיים שלי קדימה עם הזיקים ולהביא את הראש שלי. אין לי שום דבר אחר חוץ מהתורה הקדושה, והתורה הקדושה היא זו שהייתה, אותה קיבלנו במעמד הר סיני, ואותה אנחנו שומרים עד היום.
רק הם הגיעו עם דגלי ישראל, רק בגלל הציונות פוגעים ביהודים בעולם. זה מה שהרווחנו בגלל המדינה, שיש אנטישמיות בכל העולם היום, יהודים מפחדים לזוז מהבית שלהם. אז להתגייס או לא להתגייס? לא להתגייס, מה פתאום עוד שנהיה גם אנחנו ציונים? שאנחנו גם נהיה בביצה הרוצחת הזאת, בביצה הכופרת הזאת, החילונית, כל השחיתות והרוע בעולם.
יש עוד מקום שטוענים כמוך?
מה זה?
יש פה עוד חברים שחושבים כמוך?
כולם.
Netanyahu's government is hanging by a thread, and it all comes down to one explosive question. Should ultra-Orthodox Jewish men serve in the military of the Israeli Defense Forces like everyone else? You guys probably haven't heard about this news. It's Israeli news. The United Torah Judaism Party, UTJ, just quit Netanyahu's coalition based on this military conscription issue, where they're wrestling with the idea, should Hasidic Jewish men who want to dedicate their lives to studying the Torah, should they have to accept conscription orders and fight for the Israeli Defense Force? And this conversation, this struggle, this tension in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, could bring down the entire Israeli government. Here's what's happening and why it matters. For decades, ultra-Orthodox men in Israel have been exempt from military service, studying in religious seminaries, while So recording, yes. While other Israelis risk their lives defending the country. That's the framing, at least. But as the war in Gaza drags on and casualties mount, ordinary Israelis are asking a brutal question, straight up, no fluff. Why should our sons die while while their sons stay safe in study halls studying the religious texts? The Israeli Supreme Court finally said enough is enough, and they ruled that ultra Orthodox men must be drafted as well. They must accept the call to defend their country. The military announced it would issue 54,000 new draft notices, letters basically saying, yo, mans need to have a, fight for the state. Specifically, these 54,000 new notices were sent to Hasidic Jewish men, to seminary students who studied the religious text and previously would not have to accept the draft call to arms, right? And these letters ended the decades of exemption that they had because of that recent Supreme Court ruling, Israeli Supreme Court. This triggered a political earthquake. The United Torah Judaism Party, holding several crucial seats, walked out and said we're backing out of Netanyahu's government coalition on July 15th, just a couple of days ago. Their departure leaves Netanyahu with just 61 of the 120-member Knesset. So basically, he had a coalition. His party, Netanyahu's party, Likud, and then a variety of other parties together made up the majority so that they can pass legislation in Israeli parliament. But with this one part of his coalition, this little group pulling out, he's only got 61 members, which means every single member has to be on point and vote in favor of whatever Netanyahu wants to pass or push in a legislative capacity. Otherwise, he can't pass legislation. The government basically can't run. This is the narrowest possible majority. But here's the problem for, Netanyahu. Another ultra-Orthodox Jewish party, the Shas, with 11 seats, they're threatening to quit as well if they leave. Netanyahu's government collapses completely. They don't even have the 61 majority. They'll be left with 50, which means if every member of Netanyahu's coalition voted yes for whatever legislation he's going for, still they can't pass it without begging the opposition to support them. So basically, it might trigger early elections because the government collapses. There is no government. It can't pass legislation. The opposition's bigger than the main party and the main party's coalition. This would put Netanyahu in an impossible position. It already does. Give in to public pressure for equal military service for the Hasidic Jewish community and their men, but then his allies would abandon him if he does that. Or, well, his ultra-Orthodox Jewish allies like United Jewish Torah and Shas. Or the other option he has is maintain the exemption so that the Hasidic Jewish men don't have to serve and face massive public anger as Israeli soldiers continue to die in Gaza, and they're thinking, why is there 80,000 men just sitting there doing nothing while my sons are sent to their deaths? Ideally, obviously, no one would be sent to anyone's death, but, can't really call that out here. This is an Israeli internal politics post. The conscription crisis reveals a fundamental tension that's tearing Israeli society apart, for better or worse. Most Israelis demand equal sacrifice during wartime, but ultra-Orthodox parties argue military service threatens their religious identity. Netanyahu now has 48 hours to find a compromise before the resignations become official. One wrong move, and Israel's government might fall, potentially reshaping the country's political landscape forever. I made notes on this story, which many people won't be covered because it's Israeli internal politics, which of course affects geopolitics, which I primarily cover on this page. But I think it's good to know. It's very good to know. For example, those who are not particularly happy with Israel, let us put it in that way. Well, Sun Tzu, the writer of The Art of War, an ancient Chinese military strategist, he said, know your enemy and know yourself. And in 1,000 battles you shall never be in peril. Or as it wasn't 100. Anyway, you get the point. So, I just want to point out something before we end this post. The Shas party, if they also leave, Netanyahu loses his majority. And now I wrote up the notes, the semi-script for this before the latest news. The latest news at the time of this recording is the Shah's party have also backed out. So more posts coming on that. See you guys in the next one for the unbiased news and analysis without the Western spin. I'm Mahfouz, as you already know. Israel's ruling coalition government just suffered a body blow, a devastating one, the second one this week alone. The ultra-Orthodox Shah's party officially quit Netanyahu's government yesterday following United Torah Judaism's exit, another ultra-Orthodox Jewish party, earlier this week. This isn't small news, by the way, in Israel. It's a sizable shift that leaves Netanyahu's government with a minority, with just 50 out of the 120 Knesset parliamentary seats. Imagine trying to run a company but being a minority shareholder. Control is tough. Want to pass legislation? You need the opposition, who usually oppose you, to side with you to pass any bills. It's government standstill, best case scenario, government collapse, worst case scenario. Worst case scenario for the Israeli state, I suppose. Best case scenario if you're, let's say, a different nation. Anyway, here's what's really happening behind the scenes. Why did these two ultra-Orthodox Jewish parties abandon Netanyahu's government this week? The crisis erupted, you see, from military conscription laws on ultra-Orthodox Jewish men who've enjoyed decades of exemption while secular Israelis bear the military burden. Those men, Hasidic Jews, just didn't have to serve in the Israeli military. The rest of Israeli society, by and large, have to serve in the Israeli military. It's mandatory. They have mandatory conscription or military service. So, especially as Gaza's war casualties mount, especially after Iran during the 12 days and reserves currently being deployed in high numbers, meaning the rest of the Israeli economy is struggling for that manpower, reserve soldiers remaining deployed and their families are upset. There's huge public anger in Israel over the exemption for Hasidic Jewish men because they study the Torah and that's it. They don't have to serve. And it's reached a breaking point. Netanyahu's Supreme Court, the judiciary in Israel, ruled very recently that the exemptions are discriminatory. So Hasidic men, best buckle up, put on your boots. You've been served draft notices. Here you go. You open it up. It says, bro, you're going to have to serve. Soz. Even if you didn't want to. Pray for us. It doesn't say exactly that, but you get the idea, right? Here's the important bit. If these Knesset parties cannot agree on something in the next couple of days, a compromise with Netanyahu, maybe Netanyahu somehow says, fine, you don't actually have to serve. He needs to find a compromise because the other side's like, no, they better damn serve because our boys are dying in this pointless war you've signed us up for. Best we all die together, right? This is sort of the tension that Netanyahu and his administration face. If they can't come to an agreement, it will just trigger elections, right? I made a post earlier today talking about the first ultra-Orthodox Jewish party exiting. This is the second one. This leaves Netanyahu with no majority of government. This minority government scenario, which has become all but a reality now, makes passing legislation, first of all, nearly impossible, potentially paralyzing Israel during, here's the important parts, during critical Gaza ceasefire negotiations, to be honest, that were likely just performative anyway, so that won't really lead anywhere. But more importantly, for example, if Israel-Iran round 2 pops off, or Turkey starts arming Syria, or something else mad happens with Israeli government so unstable, prone to collapse, big state decisions are up in the air, like who's going to make them? Or if Netanyahu makes them, what happened to Israeli democracy? It's already a flawed idea, but even by their own standards, they're messing up, they're slipping up. Now, with the Israeli election scheduled for October 2026, next year, Netanyahu faces a choice. Call early elections on his terms or watch his government slowly collapse and fail to pass any sort of legislation that he wants. He basically won't be able to steer the ship properly. The irony, the man who survived every political crisis, Netanyahu, for decades has been saying Iran is 6 months away from a bomb. He's been saying that for the last 20, 30 years. Yet him, resilient, you could say, resilient Netanyahu, whatever, he might end up being undone by his own coalition partners. Sad. Sad. Well, is it sad? I don't know. The question everyone wants to know, of course, is how does this all affect Gaza and Iran and Lebanon and Syria, the region as a whole, basically? The answer, unless we see something very dramatic by one or more actors in the region, government collapse in this sense, internal managed government collapse, political government collapse, not military government collapse in Israel, isn't likely to bring about particular change elsewhere in the Middle East. But if things did pop off during this legislative or administrative chaos in Israel, it might make it harder for Israel to respond optimally, cohesively. Now, the military will still continue operating business as usual, but round two against Iran may be delayed. If Israel was thinking of starting it again, they might think, okay, how about no? Because our administration is currently in crisis and we can't pass any legislation because we have a minority government. For better or worse, it might be the Iran-Israel round two might be delayed. Gaza may keep going on for longer with no actual ceasefire. That's not for better or worse. That's straight up for worse, of course, due to the civilian catastrophe that has become. Time will tell how things turn out. And
I'm half Israeli, and my mom's side of the family lives in Israel. And what's going on in Israel is really sad and unfortunate. I mean, I don't want to see anybody getting hurt or killed or bombed, but play with fire, get burned. I said what I said. I'm estranged from my mom's side of the family. We don't talk. So my cousin gives me a call. And mind you, this person never calls me. I see her phone her name on the phone, and I'm like, I pick it up, and I'm like, Shalom Talita Makore. And she's like, Makore, we're getting bombed. And I'm like, okay, slow down. This is not how I want to start my morning. And she was the main answer. She's like, how is life in America? And I'm like, bitch, you come here once a year. And then she was like, well, Anilo medaberet Inglit. I'm like, it's fine, babes. You can come here. And I'm trying to have a conversation with her in Hebrew too. And the entitlement is out of this world. And then she hits me with, "At metaber ivrit re." And I'm like, bitch, you know what? I don't have to talk to you. And I was like, and if you're going to come to the States, you might as well leave that attitude and entitlement at border control. Leave it behind at customs. Don't bring it into the States. And then she called me insensitive and she hung up. And I'm like, bitch, you know what? I don't feel bad for you no more.
According to the Israeli military, suicides in the IOF have hit a 13-year high, and thousands of soldiers have stopped serving in combat because of mental distress. That's what happens when your country forces you to commit heinous war crimes and egregious crimes against humanity. You can no longer live with yourself for taking so many innocent Palestinian lives and have to take your own. Am Yisrael Chai.
Oh no. How tragic. I sure hope 1,000 more don't follow his example. Tragedy.
After 300 days of relentless bloodshed, an Israeli soldier, this one, took his own life within the walls of his military base today. A haunting testament to the unbearable weight of guilt, shame, and moral collapse that festers in the soul when one is forced to extinguish innocent lives. This act is not merely an individual tragedy, it is the mind's desperate rebellion against a psyche fractured by the dissonance of duty and humanity, where the hands that pulled the trigger could no longer silence the screams echoing within the soul. To kill the defenseless day after day is to wage war not just on others, but on one's own spirit, until the self becomes the final casualty. The suicide of multiple Israeli soldiers after such prolonged exposure to and involvement in the violence against civilians in Gaza reveals a profound unraveling, not only of the individual, but of the societal fabric that sustains such actions. Psychologically, this points to the limits of human endurance under moral strain, where propaganda and training and dehumanization can no longer suppress the innate recognition of wrong. The soldier's act reflects a breaking point. The cumulative trauma of perpetrating atrocities compounded by post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, survivors' guilt and existential despair. Studies on moral injury distinct from PTSD suggest that when individuals violate their own ethical code, as in killing unarmed civilians, the resulting self-condemnation can lead to profound isolation and depression and ultimately self-destruction. For Israeli society, this incident could ripple outward, exposing cracks in the narrative of a just war. If soldiers trained to obey and desensitized to violence succumb to such despair, it raises questions about the psychological toll on the broader population, including those who indirectly support or witness these acts and atrocities. The normalization of violence risks desensitizing the entire society. Yet this suicide suggests that even within a militarized culture, the human conscience can resist. The consequence might be a growing undercurrent of doubt, fear, or rebellion among soldiers and civilians alike, potentially fracturing morale and unity within the society. But on a larger scale, the psychological fallout could fuel cycles of resentment and radicalization,
both within Israel and among the Palestinians who see such acts as proof of their oppression. For the soldiers' peers, survivors' guilt and vicarious trauma might spread, eroding unit cohesion and operational effectiveness. Meanwhile, the Palestinian community, already scarred by hundreds of thousands of losses, may find in this the grim of validation for their resistance, intensifying their resolve. And globally, this could amplify calls for accountability, as the soldiers' death becomes a symbol of the war's inhumanity, challenging the silence of complicit nations. If this is left unaddressed, such psychological wounds threaten a society's stability, breeding apathy, aggression, or collapse eventually. Healing this requires confronting the root problem, the policies that demand such sacrifices of conscience. Without that reckoning, the ghosts of Gaza will haunt not only the soldiers, but the soul of this entire extreme nation and rogue state.
An Israeli soldier decided to unalive himself after he unalived 13 T-word people. The Zionist lobby is obviously really focused on this person's mental health and how unfortunate it is that they had to attack all of these T-words. But my question is, what if he knew that the things he had done were wrong? And the things the IDF does all the time are wrong, such as unaliving innocent children like Hind Rajab. What if he had seen that? What if he knew that maybe not all 13 people he unalived were the T-word? I will admit I don't have context on who those 13 people were, but I know in general what the IDF's been up to. And if I was in it, I would have a really hard time with myself as well. This is exactly right. These people are never going to be at peace, and their karma is just effed forever. But it's just so unfortunate that so many innocent Palestinian lives had to be lost for us to get to this point. Like, I know socially, like, they're never going to be okay. Like, most of us are probably never, ever going to hang out with anyone who supported Israel through this, right? So they're going to be crying about anti-Semitism for a long time. But even so, I mean, the fact that it's gotten to this point, the fact that so many children are orphaned and they're going to be orphans now. So, I mean, the fact that so many families have been broken. I mean, even if it stops right here, so many houses have been lost. People have lost everything that they had, everything that they loved. It's just unacceptable. But yeah, no, I'm with you. I mean, the funny thing is that the perpetrators of this violence, they're never going to get anything out of it. They're never going to be at peace.
Yes, there are almost 1,000 Israeli soldiers who have been killed during this conflict. There are more than 12,000 gravely wounded. And what we're seeing now is a spate of suicides. We have known for a while here in Israel that post-trauma and trauma is really basically a plague among the soldiers who've served in Gaza. But right now I can tell you that in the last 10 days, 3 soldiers have killed themselves. The last one, a member of a very elite brigade yesterday. 15 have killed themselves since the return to fighting. And I can tell you just now, in the last 15 minutes, we've been informed of a 4th IDF soldier, a trainee in boot camp for the paratroopers, so again, an elite brigade, who has attempted suicide just today. He is not dead, but he's in critical condition. And this has been such a plague in recent weeks and days that it's become part of the public conversation for the first time in Israel. The toll that this is taking on soldiers who are 18-year-old conscripts. In Israel, if you're not ultra-Orthodox and not an Arab, you're conscripted to the army, boys and girls alike. And so the Gaza war is being fought by young adults, very young, who have very little experience and had no say in the matter. Were simply conscripted and obliged by law to go and serve in what is turning out to be a brutal and unending war. The young soldier who killed himself yesterday had served for an entire year non-stop. and apparently simply couldn't withstand the pressure. So this is another issue that Netanyahu has to contend with, these tragedies, as de facto he's negotiating an exemption to the draft for his close coalition partners.
Lokatana Polsky in Jerusalem, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Today, we are going to discuss some extremely controversial topics. And because this is going to go on YouTube, there are certain words I cannot say. So just to warn you, I will write down these words, but I will not say them, because if I do say them, then I will get censored on YouTube. Today, we're going to look at how evil triumphs. Why is the world so evil? And there's going to be a lot of extremely disturbing topics we're going to discuss. But you're mature, and it's important that we discuss these topics in order to understand how the world works. So let's just start. And we will do a lot of speculation and theorizing in this class. So do not take this as gospel. Do not believe this is the truth. The entire point of this class is to help you develop the theories and the ideas to better understand the world. These are tools. Okay, this is not truth. These are tools. All right. So the first question I have for you is, what is happening in Israel? Right now, as you know, Israel is besieging, bombarding Gaza. You might have seen the videos on social media. It is disturbing. It is terrible what is happening. The word that is happening, the word that we use for what is happening in Gaza is this word. You are not allowed to say this word on YouTube, but that is the intention. What I will argue, though, is that the truth is far more disturbing than this. What is really happening in Gaza is a ritual sacrifice. And this happens quite often in human history. If you go back and you look at the real history of humanity, this happens quite often. Some of the most famous examples are the Aztecs. We've dug up temples of the Aztecs, and inside the temples are thousands and thousands of human skulls. So before they went to war, they practiced human sacrifice. They would commit mass murder of their enemies in public. So the Aztecs were really famous for this. The Phoenicians, specifically the Carthaginians. We will discuss them later this semester, but the Phoenicians were also famous for a particular type of sacrifice, which is child sacrifice. The Romans wrote histories insulting the Phoenicians for practicing this sort of sacrifice. But the Romans themselves practiced human sacrifice. What they would do is that after every major war, they would capture all the major leaders, all their enemies, and they would parade their enemies through the streets of Rome. This is something called the triumph. At the end of the triumph, they would gather enemies at the temple of Jupiter. Jupiter is their god. And then they would strangle to death their enemies. That's sacrifice. That's human sacrifice. They didn't call it that, okay? And they sort of disguised it, but we know for a fact that they did do this. So the question for us is, why is it that this happens? Why do the Aztecs do it? Why do the Phoenicians do it? Why do the Romans do it? And why is it today the Israelis do it in Gaza? And remember, okay, what the Israelis are doing is quite horrific because it is really this sort of sacrifice. Why? Because 47%, almost half of the population of Gaza is under 18 years old. So the majority of people who are getting killed are in fact children. What is most striking or blatant about what's happening in Gaza is that we can all see it for ourselves. And it's almost as though the Israelis want us to see it and want us to hate them. Right? You can see all over the world, popular opinion is turning against Israel. You have these popular protests all around the world protesting what is happening in Palestine. If they really want to do this, right, there are actually much more effective ways of doing this. For example, you could just poison their water. Or you could poison the air so that everyone in Gaza gets a fast cancer, right? We have the technology to do this. So Israel could do it this secretly and no one would talk about it. And in 20 years' time, 30 years' time, the population of Gaza would all be gone. It would be a very secret, right? Instead, they choose to do this in front of the world. And my argument to you is that this is intentional. They want the world to hate them. Because by doing this, they create the ultimate taboo. Right? We find this disgusting and contemptuous, so the entire world will unite against Israel. But guess what? That's what their religion wants. In the extreme form of Jewish eschatology, or their religion, they believe that at the end of the world, Israel will fight the entire world and God will help Israel triumph in the end. So what's really happening in Gaza is that there are extremists within the Israel government who want to accelerate the process of the end of the world where Israel will face the world. And if you think about it, the entire idea of this ritual sacrifice is to unite the Israeli population. And what's extremely disturbing and horrifying about it is that this works. Why? Well, let's use an analogy, okay? The analogy is this. In Chinese history, the most popular military stratagem is to fight with a river behind your back. You guys have heard of this strategy, right? Where, okay, an army is losing, okay? It's being scattered by the enemy. So what the general does is forces the army to retreat to a river. And now with the river blocking your escape, you have a choice. You can either drown in the river or you can fight to the death. And most soldiers will choose to fight to the death. And so at this point, the soldiers are unified, they're galvanized, they're energized, and then they find a surge of energy to go and destroy their enemy. Okay, this is the most popular military stratagem in ancient Chinese history, and guess what? It's the same as Israel doing this right now in Gaza. It's the same logic. Yes? You have a question?
So what is the river for the Israel?
That's a good question. What's the river right here, right? The river is a taboo, right? What's the worst thing you can do in modern society? Killing children, guys, right? So there's no exit for Israel. You either go all the way or the world comes and destroys you anyway. And in fact, what's really interesting is that if you go online, you will see Israelis go around the world and causing trouble everywhere. They're going to start fights. They shout death to the Arabs on public buses in the Western world. It's intentional. They want to unite themselves by dividing the world, by angering the world. Okay? Does that make sense?